and this is the last video of this class. I want to thank you all for actually going through this all, and what I would really like if you guys could send this last render to me and I can give some feedback, just show you maybe what you could improve in next renders, or just give a nice like and give a nice comment to your amazing render, right? So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna give our last material to these little rubber parts underneath. So just create a new material, rubber. Doesn't have to be too specific, okay? Just make it dark, gray. Roughness goes a bit up to like 0.8 or 0.7. And that is essentially it, right? Same material for these back little rubbers. And that's it. So, quite easy. Now, we need to start rendering. And with rendering, there are a few things that are quite important. First, I would like to create a studio. So let's go to modeling. Click on Shift C to make sure our 3D cursor is in the middle. Then let's create a plane. Scale this up maybe times 5 or 4. Then move this down around the Z-axis. We don't really know where to place it, so let's click on 3 to go to the side view. And we can move this down around here. Now, if you go to edit mode, you can select this last edge here. Extrude it and click on Z to move it around the Z axis. We want to apply the scale, so Ctrl A and scale. And we're gonna add a bevel modifier. If we just render this without a bevel modifier, so let's say I'm gonna go here, you can see a very distinctive edge, which kind of separates the floor plane from the back plane. This could be a choice of yours, but in this case, I want it nice and smooth. So I'm gonna use a few more segments inside my bevel modifier. Let me show you here. And put the amount up. So I make a very nice and smooth transition here. If you're happy with your transition, right click, shade smooth, and let's look back. And now you can see we don't have this edge anymore, but it is nice and smooth. We do, however, have a huge shadow, and that is of course because of our HDRI. I am not hating on the HDRI, but I would like to add another HDRI in the end and keep this one off for right now. So go to shading, into world, and put the strength at 0. I do this often just so I can focus on the lights that I'm gonna add right now. So let's first put a camera in position, click on 0, click here, go to view, camera to view. I like a view like this. Let's zoom a bit in. Something like this looks interesting to me. Take this off and we can start to put our lights in here. So, render viewport shading. We have it all black right now because I literally just turned the background off all the way. And we can start with Shift A to add a light. Let's add a point light. This is our point light. And often in beginners, I just see that this happens. Shift D, right? We all know about the 3-point light setting, then we just duplicate them over and over, and this will probably be it. But the lights that you add just don't make any sense. Why do you add them should be the first question, right? What do you want to achieve? So first of all, we start with one light. This is our first light, and we're gonna rename this light, instead of point, to key light. This is the key light in our light setup, and often the key light is the brightest, because the light that we want the most focus on is the key light. So, what do we want this key light to do? We want to light up our scene, as we can see here, to light up our model, and we want to look at how much light it is creating, if we're under or overexposing, but also look at the shadows, right? Do we want soft shadows or do we want more sharp and harsh shadows? That is all what we can do with our main light. So how do we do all of this? Well, first of all, I want to show you how we can change kind of the shadow sharpness. So if you go inside the light option, so the object data properties of the light itself, then we see a radius. The bigger the light is, the smoother and softer the shadows will be. This could be handy if you want to make something look smooth. A lot of times you render a face, for instance, a female face with nice, smooth, and big lights. So all the lights that they use have like a softbox. But if you want very small details, or maybe you want to see an abs of a bodybuilder a bit better, then they often use a bit of a harsher light. And also the position, of course, matters, because if you put a harsh light from the front, you will still not see any abs. The light needs to go from top, right? So in this case, we want the same. So look or choose a position in which you think you want to light up your model. In this case, I think a light here would do a lot good for our scene. We have some nice highlights here, here, on the legs, and of course on our model itself. Perfect. So let's say this is what I want. But how bright do I put my light? So go into Object, use Nodes for this light, and here we have this emission node. Instead of playing around with the power here, we can now put the strength up and down. And a lot of times it's like, yeah, you're kind of just guessing, this is probably good, you know what I mean? Or maybe this is good, but you don't really know if you're under or overexposing your model. Well, if you go into the render properties, scroll down and go to color management, we have a nice view transform filmic. Let's put this to false color and we can see that, hey, these are all weird colors. What is happening here? This essentially shows you if you are over or underexposing your render or your model. Now, in this case, let me put my strength all the way up. And you can see that we reach dark red or even white. So this will be overexposure. Let's go back to Filmic and you can see that it is so bright it looks white and we will lose a lot of color data. So that is the problem that we have here. That is why you don't want to overexpose anything. You will just lose all the color data. We also don't see any depth anymore. Our normals are almost gone. You can literally just not see anything anymore. If we put the strength down, however, you can see that now it's underexposed. Also here, you will lose color data. It is too black to get any color data from here. And if you put it too low, it's just all the way black. So you know that those things are wrong. And they make sense, right? But what is good? Let's go back to false color and put the strength up. So what essentially is good is the middle point. And in this case, it is gray. So you can see here that it is grayish. Also, this is a little bit hard because if you now go to Filmic, you can see that, it looks decent, but is it that appealing? Especially with some of these product renders, you might want to put them later on into Photoshop again and start to edit it there or even inside Blender itself. But personally, I also like to do that. I will also bring my renders, of course, inside another program and edit them a little bit. But you can also go a little bit higher. So in this case, we are reaching the green, almost yellow. But if you put it a little bit higher, you can see we are getting more towards the yellow. And also this gray parts are essentially getting a bit more sharp. So I like to go around here. Let's go to Filmic again. And here you can see that this is some nice lighting. So that is essentially how you know how bright your lights can actually go. So that is our key light. And next to the key light, on the opposite side, we often put a fill light. Let's put the strength all the way to 0. And I want you guys to notice what happens with the fill light. Why is it even called a fill light? Well, let me put the strength up slowly, and you will slowly see that this fill light fills up the shadows from the key light. Right? So the shadows are here, and we are slowly filling them up. Also, often the key light, as I said, is the brightest. If we put the fill light just as bright, you can see that now we don't even have any shadows anymore. Yeah, we created a new shadow here, but all of these nice shadows that we had before are gone. And you have to keep in mind, shadows are just as important as light. So let's put this way lower. And here we can see that we still have a nice shadow here, but it is just not too dark. It makes sense. And that is what you want to create with the fill light. In this case, I would also like to add a rim light. So here we can rename this to rim light. And a rim light, if we hide these other ones, essentially creates this nice rim light, as it is called, right? So it can also be named background light, something like that, but it creates this nice rim on here. And especially I feel like in these fabric parts, it also really creates this nice sheen effect that we talked about before. Plus we get these very cool reflections or lighter areas on these armrests right now. So that is what we want to achieve with the rim light. And you could see that I actually turned off these other lights. I often do that just to see what a certain light is doing. So in this case, I do think maybe the key light is a bit too bright. So let's put it a bit down to like 9. Add the fill light and the rim light. And here we have a decent start for our render. You can still play around with these lights, but you also want to look at your background. Because if we want to add the background all at once, we also need to look at that. So let's move this background a bit forward. And you can see that now it starts to make all a little bit more sense. And this background has way less shadows because we moved it closer. Now, this actually is starting to look quite decent. And if we start to render this with F12, we create a render. In this class, I'm not going to talk about rendering separate layers, even though it is quite handy. I first want you to understand kind of the basics of rendering. So let's say this is what we want. I would highly suggest you first save this. And then we can talk a little bit about the render options that we have here. So in Blender 3.0, the render options changed a little bit. We have now sampling, which is separated in viewport and render. Right now we're going to render, of course. In this render, we have a noise threshold, we have a max samples, we have a denoise option. These are a lot of options, and it is a little bit up to your computer and how much time you want to spend into rendering a certain piece. So I cannot just say like, oh, you should do this, because if you have a very crappy computer but still want to just finish this, then I cannot say like, yeah, go wait like 4 days for it's rendered, right? It doesn't make any sense. So you could put a time limit, for instance. If you say like, hey, I want a decent result. I know this is going to be my final render, but I don't want to wait a day. Maybe 15 minutes. So you need to do 15 times 60 then, right? Because it is counted in seconds. That could be your total render. Or if you have a very good computer, you could be like, oh, maybe I will just do 60 seconds, which is 1 minute. And I do think you should use the denoise option. It's quite handy, it works quite well. And that is essentially it. We can of course go into the light paths and bounces, but I don't think that is necessary for right now. So if we just render this with F12, then when it's done, we end up with an image like this. You can always go into image and use save as to save your image. I personally do like file format TIFF and then use a 16 color depth, RGBA is fine, and then save as image. So what to do with this image now? In this case, I do think it looks already very pretty. But if you want to edit this, you could do it in multiple programs. I personally like Photoshop a lot, but I understand that not everyone has Photoshop. You can also do it inside Blender itself. So let's do that. And for that, I would highly suggest you open a new Blender file. So make sure you just close this and save your other blend file. Then we can open a new one. So just new general. What we want to do is we want to jump to compositing. And here we're going to use nodes. Right now, we are not going to use render layers because we're going to import an image. So just input, image. Here we can open your last image. And right now we have this image here. So you can just drag it into the composite, but we still cannot see it. If you hold Ctrl and Shift and then left click on your image, you get this viewer node. You can also add this viewer node, and this only works if you have the add-on installed, right? So we talked about it before. Preferences add-on is the Node Wrangler add-on. So in this backdrop here, we can see our chair. And right now, if I want to zoom out or move it around, you might try, but you can see that we are only using these nodes, right? We are only zooming in and out with these nodes. So go to View, and here you can actually see that the nodes are kind of the main purpose. So this is, the scroll wheel in, scroll wheel out is just using all these nodes. But the backdrop move, the backdrop zoom in, the backdrop zoom out have different shortkeys applied to it. So if we want to zoom out, we click on V, right? And that zooms out our backdrop. Okay, so keep that in mind. You can always see them under View, so you will never really have to get confused. So here we have it. And how do we edit this? Well, what we can do is we can just start to add nodes. And most nodes that you kind of want to use are just very simple nodes in this case, okay? So we just want to maybe change the hue and saturation a little bit. Then you have hue, saturation, and value. So here we can move it a little bit around, and you can see that instantly everything changes. Maybe we want a little bit more saturation or even less saturation. That's totally possible. Maybe you want this image to have a little bit more contrast. So Shift A and you can go into color. Here's also brightness and contrast, color balance, and all that good stuff. So let's do brightness and contrast. And you can put this contrast a little bit up. You can always see if you put it very high what's really happening. So don't overdo it, of course, but you can kind of see what is happening, right? So often you want to do small values in here because we, of course, are trying to get as close as possible with our render and then just tweak it a little bit just to make it more pleasing to us. And that is essentially it. By the way, I personally like to use, instead of the brightness and contrast or with the brightness and contrast, some RGB curves. And with these curves, you can literally just drag this a little bit around and create it like that. But yeah, that is how you really can finalize your image, as you can see. And yeah, make it even more beautiful and pretty than it already was. If you are happy with your result here, the only thing you have to do is connect your end node to the composite node. Then let me just overdo it a little bit so you guys can see what's happening. Let me do this. Then just click on F12 and here you have your composited image. And you just have to save image, right? Just as normal, save as, and then you can save it. So that is literally it. And I want to thank you all for participating in this class. I also really hope that you will send your rendered or your final image to me, so maybe I can give some feedback, right? If you want more furniture creating lessons, then please let me know. Also, if you have maybe something else in mind, like, oh, I want to learn that, or another model, or a totally different topic, then please let me know, because if enough people want to learn a specific topic, then I actually know what you guys want to learn, and I can create a whole class or course around it, right? So please let me know. And yeah, thank you all, and I will see your renders coming up. Bye-bye.